The numbers tell the tale. If Vermont's student enrollment and staffing levels were plotted on a graph, the arrows would be crossing and moving in opposite directions. At a time when the student population of Vermont's kindergarten through 12th grade schools has declined by more than 25,000 students over the past 20 years, the staffing levels in those schools have risen by more than 2,500. To be clear, school staff includes all school personnel, bus drivers, custodians, administrators, as well as teachers. But still, at first blush, it seems counterintuitive that those numbers should have increased when the number of students has dropped so sharply. This fact, among many others influencing the structure of education in Vermont, was highlighted at a major education summit meeting last December at Norwich University. Locally, school officials are already moving forward on seeking solutions. Last fall, Jackie Wilson, the superintendent of the Bennington-Rutland Supervisor Union, raised the issue with her board members and described some of the ideas they've been considering.
Well, this is, of course, the first time we're building a Taconic and Green budget. It's the first budget as a new entity. So it's caused me to look at staffing patterns across the board in our schools and to really think about that. And we have, over time, become, I think, we don't have small class sizes, I think we have micro class sizes. And I can think back to, I was teaching at MEMS 25 years ago, and it was the norm for me to have, as a sixth grade teacher, to have 23 to 25 kids in my class. Over time, if you look at our history across all of our schools that are now part of the Taconic and Green, in the last 20 years, we've seen a 20% decline in student enrollment. And that's, I think, pretty much mirrors what we've seen at the state level. And our staffing has not responded to that in the way I think that it should respond to that. So I challenged the Taconic and Green school board at our meeting in late October to really embrace the idea of using attrition only right now to right size our staffing patterns. When a teacher leaves or a teacher retires, for us to look really closely at any opportunity that might exist for us to do business differently and to not replace that position. To teacher ratio average right now is around 10 to 1, and that's inclusive of our special, our unified arts teachers, etc. But the average, that's about the average. It's 10. Some schools are 10 to 1, some are 12.5 to 1. Just classroom teachers. If we look at total staff to student, it's around 4.2 to 1. So that's a whole other issue that we haven't embarked upon yet, but we will start to take a look at as our total staffing ratio, and the state is asking us to consider to move that dial to 5 to 1 as a total overall staff ratio to student would save the state. It was something like $125 million in education if we just moved in that direction. So those are things I think we have to think about, to be responsible to our taxpayers. Vermont has the lowest staff to student ratio in the country. And the highest cost. So those two things are fairly, they're linked.
Herb Ogden, the chairman of the Taconic and Green Board, gave us his takeaway on staffing levels.
There is a goal of trying to change the ratio and a goal of figuring out how many pupils per teacher there ought to be at various grade levels. And that led to an interesting discussion because as a parent of a kid who went to Long Trail School, for example, I thought it was a good thing that they had small classes. And the answer to that is small classes work fine as long as all the students are roughly the same ability. But if you have a small class where 2 kids are way behind, 2 kids are about average, and 2 kids are way ahead, the conventional wisdom that I wasn't aware of is that that actually works less well than if you had, let's say, a class of 22 that had the same kind of division, because in a class of 22 where you have maybe 6 kids in one category, 6 kids in another, 10 kids in the next, whatever it is, the teacher or maybe a paraeducator can work with each of the small groups, which is big enough to be a group you can work with, as opposed to, let's say, 2 kids.
Education issues and their costs are perennial subjects of debate in Vermont, with legislators exploring a change to the education funding formula that may involve adding an income-based tax into the mix to help defray education expenses. The issue of costs and the student-to-staff ratio is unlikely to go away soon, while Vermont has the lowest staff-to-student ratio. At the same time, the Vermont NEA, the state teachers union, will also be following the trends across the state.
I think that every school district it's up to them, and school districts have been laying people off. They have been cutting staff because of attrition over the years, and I think that they're doing what they need to do on an individual district basis.
The highest ratio is found in Utah, with a ratio of just over 22 students to 1 teacher, followed closely behind by Oregon and California, according to data from the U.S. Department of Education. For the GNet TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.